Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at Judges chapters 13 through 16 in our continuing study of the historical books of the Old Testament. We've already been looking at the outline, and notice it's a chiastic format. We saw in the middle of this section, notice the Gideon narrative in the middle, and then the Deborah, Barak, and the Abimelech narrative, both in which a woman slays the enemy with a blow to the head. Then we went from there to Jephthah, and that corresponded to Ehud, where in both cases the judge is a social outcast, and there's oppressors from the east side of the Jordan. Now we come to the Samson narrative. Notice its counterpart was Othniel, but that was actually a very brief, just a few verses, whereas Samson narrative is going to be a few chapters, so it's quite a bit longer. And then next time we'll be looking at the epilogue. That's going to be in depth. We'll have to spend quite a bit of time on that. The Samson narrative then starts with his birth. Read in Judges chapter 13, verse 1. Now the sons of Israel again did evil in the sight of the Lord, so that the Lord gave them into the hands, and this time it's of the Philistines for 40 years. The Philistines were descended, at least in part, from a group known as the Sea Peoples, who seem to have come somewhere around the Aegean. We're not sure exactly where. They had attempted to invade Egypt in the days of Ramses III. He had kept them out, and then he took credit for having allowed them to settle. I don't know how much truth there was in his words, but they had settled on the southern coast of Canaan, along the ocean. They developed 5 cities that were there in that region. I remember talking a number of years ago to an expert in the Philippines, somebody who'd done archaeological studies of these areas, and he mentioned that the culture there that grew up, the Philistine culture, was actually a blend of both folks from the Aegean and their, think about the Mycenaean culture, but also had integrated somewhat with the people of Canaan. And so even place names and city names and people's names, you might find one that's Canaanite and one that can be traced maybe to that Sea People, Mycenaean sort of origin. The thing to remember is they were a culturally advanced people. When I say culture, I'm talking about the style of their weapons. They had the secret of smelting iron, and this is just shortly after the advent of the Iron Age. So they come into the land, and they're the most astute, they're the most cultured, they're the most military capable people. Egypt was able to keep them out, but the Canaanites are no match for them, and the Israelites really are no match for them either. We pick up in chapter 13, verse 2. There was a certain man of Zorah, of the family of the Danites, and Dan had been given a possession. The tribe of Dan had been given the area that was uncomfortably close to the land of the Philistines. And this man's name was Manoah, and his wife was barren and had borne no children. We've seen that story again and again, a time when there'd be a couple that were married and no children, and that didn't speak well for their future. Verse 3, then the angel of the Lord appeared to the woman and said to her, behold, now you are barren and have borne no children, but you shall conceive and give birth to a son. Now therefore be careful not to drink wine or strong drink. It's probably a good idea for any pregnancy. But we continue, nor eat any unclean thing, for behold, you shall conceive and give birth to a son, and no razor shall come upon his head, for the boy shall be a Nazarite unto God from the womb. That is, he's going to be dedicated to the Lord, separated in the same way that you might have a branch from a tree that sort of gets separated. And the term for branch is similar to this. I'm not sure that that's where you get the Nazarite idea, but the words sound alike. And notice, he shall begin to deliver Israel from the hands of the Philistines. I find it interesting that the translation says he's going to begin. I'm not sure he's going to complete it. We're still going to see Philistines around as a issue in the days of Saul and later on even in the days of David. But at least it's going to start here. Then the woman gave birth to a son and named him, my English translation says Samson. The Greek text is Shimshon. It sounds close enough like it. You say, where does that Shimshon? Those first 3 letters, the sh sound, the shin and the mem and the second shin. You put those together, that's actually Shemesh is the actual word for the sun. I'm not sure if that was deliberate or it just happens to have a name that sounded like that. Um, I simply don't know. Was she giving him a pagan name? Maybe because they were so close to the Philistines and some of those Canaanite cultures that they had been influenced by that. Again, I don't know. Shemesh was not only the word for the sun, there was actually a pagan god. Remember that some groups would worship the sun. There was a pagan god named Shemesh. Now, I don't know that he's being named after that, but I don't know that he's not because again, the names are very close. And we're not going to see this name used a lot by the Jews, and maybe for that reason. Now, the place where they're living, there's a city there called Beth Shemesh. Remember, Shemesh is the term for the sun. So, house of the sun, or if I want to stretch it a little bit, the house of Samson. And he's going to be in this region where you have the foothills to the east. That's the tribe of Judah, and actually going up to the mountains. And then the plains is you have this valley called the Sorek Valley connecting the two. And in the plains, you have cities like Ekron, which is a Philistine city, and you have these towns in the middle of the Shephelah, that is the foothills, where you're going from the lowlands to the highlands, and you got to go through the foothills to get there. And it's sort of no man's land, except that there are people living here. Well, we read that Samson went down to Timnah, that's on the Philistine side, and saw a woman in Timnah, one of the daughters of the Philistines. Chapter 14, verse 2, so he came back and told his father and mother, I saw a woman in Timnah, one of the daughters of the Philistines. Now therefore get her for me as a wife. Well, his father and mother said to him, is there no woman among the daughters of your relatives, among all our people? There was a good Jewish girl that you go to take a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines. But Samson said to his father, get her for me, for she looks good to me. Notice he's operating not on how spiritual she might be, not on how good of a wife she might be, but she looks good. That's guys. Sometimes a gal can look good, but not be of the Lord, and that seems to be the case here. However, his father and mother did not know that it was of the Lord. Now, that doesn't mean that Samson's being spiritual here. It means that God is using his foolish choices to do what God wants done. Notice the rest of the explanation. For he, that is God, was seeking an occasion against the Philistines. Now, at that time, the Philistines were ruling over Israel. They were the most technologically advanced. They could dictate everything. They were in charge and probably taking their bribe money and their blackmail money and things like that. They didn't actually have coins yet, so probably taking it in possessions from the Israelites. Now, the conflict begins to escalate, first of all, at the wedding. Sure enough, there is a wedding ceremony. Remember, their ceremonies don't lie. It wasn't just you walk down an aisle, you exchange vows, and you're done. In the ancient wedding, both among the Jews and non-Jews, the wedding was all about the honeymoon. And you'd come together for a party, and it wouldn't last just one day. It would last multiple days. And while this is taking place, Samson proposes a riddle. Maybe he was feeling playful. And he sets forth a riddle to his guests. And the price is actually quite expensive. Who's going to win this? And the Philistines go and threaten his bride to get the answer, and they threaten her with death. And so she goes ahead and wheedles Samson until he gives her the answer, and she gives it to them. And Samson has lost the wager, and it's a rather high and expensive wager. And he realizes what's happened. So to pay off this gambling debt, he goes out and kills a bunch of Philistines, takes their the wager is for like some sort of clothing, high priced clothing. He kills a bunch of Philistines, strips them, and uses that to pay off his gambling debt, which is making everybody's mad at everybody at this point. And so Samson's bride is taken because he's angry at her. He realizes that that she caved in, she betrayed him, And so her father gives him in marriage to one of the other wedding guests, and he finds out, and now Samson is really mad. So next we have Samson goes out and burns some of the farmlands of the Philistines. He captures, not sure about his technique here, but he captures a bunch of foxes and then ties burning brands to their tails, and then they're running away from the fire, and the fire spreads. It's like a big arson incident, and burns the farmlands of the Philistines. And remember, farmlands, that's where your wealth is generated. Well, the Philistines then, and they murder his former bride out of vengeance for what Samson has done. And, she was sort of stuck in the middle, I suppose. Next, he is taken and turned, the Philistines go to the Israelites, say, if you don't turn him over, we're going to destroy you. And so they turn over Samson. He allows himself to be turned over. And he's handed over to the Philistines. And as they are taking him back, God strengthens him. Now remember that any strength that Samson had, we have to be careful here. We don't read that he had this big giant, physique, muscle building. It might be that he looked quite normal, but that it was God who gave him his strength, because we read that the Spirit of the Lord came upon him, and suddenly he was able to break the bonds where he was bound, and he happened to find a nearby weapon, just the jawbone of a donkey, of an ass, and he used this as his weapon. And remember, the Philistines, they're all armed. They've got state of the art armory and weapons and swords and shields and spears, and he takes on 1,000 men. Now, probably the terrain helped a bit where they couldn't all jump on him at once, but he takes out, he just keeps killing and killing and killing, and it's an extraordinary event. Later on, he hauls away the gates of the city of Gaza. He's actually there with another Philistine woman. This time seems to be a prostitute. And they hear he's in town, and they try to close the gates and capture him. And he pulls the gates out their hinges and carries them, not just like, just outside the city, but he carries them off into the hills. He is finally betrayed by still another woman. Let me just say, Samson had problems with women. This time it's another woman by the name of Delilah. And she conspires to learn, this time, the secret not of a gambling debt, but of his strength. And initially, he doesn't tell her, but she continues on. And finally, he breaks down and he tells her that God had said, and we didn't get all of this from the initial description of God's orders, but apparently God had said your hair is going, it's not to be cut, and God had said that earlier, and that would be the key to your strength. Your obedience would be the key to your strength. And so while he's asleep, she has his hair cut, and he wakes up, and the Philistines are coming in, and they grab him, and he's powerless. He's just like a normal person, and they take him and they gouge out his eyes. This is the last thing that Samson ever sees. We read in chapter 16, verse 23, now the lords of the Philistines assembled to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon, their god. By this time, 2 years have passed, and Samson had been a captive, a blinded captive. And Judges mentions, but his hair had started to grow again. um, and now that doesn't mean he regained his strength. It wasn't about his hair; it was about God. But the lords of the Philistines assemble. They're sacrificing to their God. They're rejoicing. They said, "Our God has given Samson, our enemy, into their hands." 2 years later, they're still celebrating. Verse 25, it so happened when they were in high spirits that they said, call for Samson that he may amuse us. So they called for Samson from the prison, and he entertained them, and not like he was there for them to make fun of him, for them to dishonor him. And they made him stand between the pillars. Seeing that we actually have at least one example, maybe there's others, of a temple in one of the Philistine cities. There's a photo by Dave Dorsey, who gave us a lot of the chiastic outlines that I share. And notice you can see the remnants of two pillars there. Now, I'm not sure if it looked exactly like this in Samson's day, but we've actually seen this echoed in archaeology. And so while he is there, verse 28, chapter 16, verse 28, Samson called to the Lord and said, O Lord God, please remember me and please strengthen me just this time. Notice his strength wasn't there just because of his hair. His strength is there because of God, and he recognizes that. No, notice, please strengthen me just this time, O God, that I may at once be avenged of the Philistines for my two eyes. So 2 columns, 2 eyes, and God grants his request. And we read that Samson grasped the 2 middle pillars on which the house rested and braced himself against them, the one with his right hand and the other with his left. And Samson said, let me die with the Philistines. And he bent with all his might so that the house fell on the lords and all the people who were in it. So the dead whom he killed at his death were more than those whom he killed in his life. And we already saw 1,000 people at one time and other Philistines at other times. And so Samson, it's sort of a suicide move. Think of Samson taking people with him as he commits suicide. Now, Samson had not been a good story. God is using him in spite of Samson's, can I say, his unfaithfulness, in spite of his recklessness, in spite of his poor choices, and yet God uses him for God's purposes. And it's interesting that we also have a Savior and a Judge who had an impossible birth. In the case of Jesus, one who was born not just of a barren woman, but of a virgin, who was set apart from birth as a deliverer, who was betrayed by a loved one, not a woman, but by one of his own apostles, one that he had chosen, Judas Iscariot, did his greatest work in his death. And yet one of these stories, the story of Samson, is about revenge. The story of Jesus is not about revenge, it's about forgiveness and how we can receive it through the one who gave his life for us.